This is Look West, a podcast from California's Assembly Democrats.
Hi, I'm Joel Wolfork with Look West. February is Black History Month, and while that may mean something different for everyone, I've always appreciated having the time and space to learn about our history that has often been overlooked, rewritten, or covered up. I sat down with Lori Wilson, chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, to talk about their priorities and ask her if Californians really know Black history.
I do not think that most Californians have a real understanding of Black history. That includes all Californians, whether they are Black or not. I think we understand the trauma of Black history through fictionalized movies and things of such, but understanding true Black history, the full nuance of it, I don't think we understand.
Now, does the Black history provided in schools and communities provide a real portrayal of Black history?
No, I would love to see more in our schools, and I know there's been legislation on that in the past to push that in terms of ethnic studies. There's been a push for more Black history being delivered to our students. We're just not there yet. And even in, like I said, our communities, we get a lot of our Black history from the movies we see, and there's a fictionalized version of history, and so we don't understand truly what Black history is, as well as the contributions that Black folks have made to America and to our world. And so I think that we have to do a better job of really educating everyone on the true trauma, not the fictionalized trauma, but true trauma, but also the true contributions, and really marrying the fact that Black history is American history. And so having it have a more comprehensive view.
Now, why is it important for everyone to know the real history of African Americans, not just this fictionalized trauma that we see in movies?
Because you know what, when we don't recognize someone for who they are, we look at them as an other. And it's crazy that we live in America and Black folks who've been here and have built this country still are looked at as an other. And I believe that's because they're not properly educated on our history, what we've gone through as a people. And like I said, not in a fictionalized way, in a real way, as well as the contributions we've made. And I think if we were to do that, we would not be an other. We would be valued as a part of the community.
Thank you. Now, recent Black history includes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Assembly held a special ceremony to honor his life and legacy. In your remarks that day, you quoted from Dr. King's Other America speech about how freedom is the bonus you receive for telling the truth, and that the truth will set you free. Can you tell us why you chose that quote, please?
As I've seen over probably the last, 8 years now, we have seen a rolling back of the truth. We have seen so much misinformation. We have seen a rolling back of our rights, whether it's as, for me, I look at myself as a Black woman. And so as a black person and as a woman. And a lot of this is based on just misinformation and people rewriting history in a way that damages and causes further trauma to our nation. And so for me, it was really important to highlight the words of Dr. King about truth. It's our freedom is found in truth. All the truth, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of the truth. That is where our freedom is found, and how important it is to recognize that we should not run from the truth just because it's uncomfortable. But if we head forward directly into the truth and face it front on, then it will set us free and we will have a brighter future for our children. But we are setting this next generation up for failure by the way we are denying our history. And we know what it said. When you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat it. Mm-hmm. And so it is important that we tell the truth about the past so that we can find a pathway forward. And like Dr. King said, we will be free.
Now, on that same day, presenting this resolution, Assemblymember Tina McKenna, your colleague in the CLBC, she remarked about women being underrepresented in Black history. She told a story about singer Mahalia Jackson as one example where Mahalia Jackson spoke up during Martin Luther King's speech and asked him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And after that came a spontaneous outpour of inspiration that transformed the nation. Now, does it feel that way to you, that women are underrepresented in Black history?
I love that Assemblymember McKenna was able to speak on our resolution as a CLBC member, but on behalf of the Women's Caucus, and highlight women's role in the civil rights movement and pushing forward progress. Because although they didn't have a front row seat, they were driving it in every single way. They were driving it in their communities. They were driving it in their homes. They were pushing the movement forward. Although we had the speakers who were men standing as the leaders, when you look at the background, it was the women who were pushing this forward in their communities and leading the actual communities doing the work. And so I thought it was an amazing tribute to Mahalia in the sense that, one, she has a beautiful voice, but she was definitely an advisor to Dr. King, and we would not have heard that "I Have a Dream" speech on those steps. He had said it before. It was a repeat of something he had said before, but we wouldn't have heard it on those steps. And that iconic moment had a woman not say, "Tell them about the dream." And sometimes, that is what we do as women. We might not be out front, but we're like, go do your thing and force people to do their thing. And so that was an amazing moment on the floor for her to highlight, just Black women and their role in the civil rights movement and give honor to whom honor is due.
That's a really great point. As a follow-up to that, is there a favorite moment or something that you will always remember learning about a woman in Black history?
For me, it has always been, and there are wonderful women who have contributed to the success of our nation. Black women, but I always remember learning as a young woman about Harriet Tubman and how it really transformed my mind about who I was as a Black woman. And at this time, I'm a little girl, and just her power and strength to do the work that she did with violence at every step. Right? Now, violence against her, protecting people from violence was pretty amazing. And she was strong, and she she didn't look like, as a little girl, we had all these icons. I'll tell my age a little bit, in the 80s, who had a very, European Anglo look. And to learn about Harriet Tubman, who didn't have that, she looked like a Black woman. She looked like a Black woman of her day. And it just helped me with my own inner self-esteem of the power that comes from me as a Black woman. And I've held on to that for the rest of my life, even to this day. The lessons learned from Harriet Tubman, just doing what she did and being in that space, and doing something that she didn't look like the tradition, beauty standards that we had of the day, but she also did it, didn't have the, what word am I looking for? The tradition of even what women were doing in her time. Right? Women weren't doing the kind of things that she was doing. And it just challenged my viewpoint of what it meant to be a Black woman, not only like in beauty standards, but also what it meant to be a Black woman in terms of the work that I did.
And now, what about today? Who's an inspirational Black woman for you in today's time?
I would probably say, oh my gosh, there's so many. I look up to Michelle Obama. I think, VP Kamala Harris, but I think probably for me right now, who I've just been following and been really impressed by is Ava DuVernay. She is a screenwriter, director, an amazing woman who is really, at her essence, from my point of view, a storyteller. And her ability to, tell stories of the Black community. I mean, she, I first probably knew who she was with Selma, and that movie, and how amazing she was at being authentic in it, not sensationalizing the Black trauma related to it, but telling our story. I know she has a new film out, Origin. I haven't seen it. But I look forward to it. You'd not have to find time in this busy legislative session to watch a movie. But I think that when you have an amazing storyteller who can really highlight the Black community and really share it with those who are not Black and have them walk away with a deeper understanding of who we are as individuals, who we are as a community. That is a beautiful thing, and I look up to her for that.
So you mentioned without knowing our history, we're doomed to make the same mistakes in the future. Now, the history of Black Americans is the main driving point behind a lot of the legislative priorities of the CLBC. So I want to talk with you about legislation related to reparations. You've said reparations is about much more than cash payments. Does this legislative package reflect that?
Absolutely. Our legislative package is broad in nature. We touch on health, business, education, criminal justice reform, civil rights. There is not a subject that goes untouched. And that really is because the historic work of the Reparations Task Force, they did the same thing. It was very broad in nature and comprehensive, look at all aspects of life and how the harms that came from the legacy of slavery and the generations of discrimination and racism against Black Californians, how that impacted every aspect of their life. And so they gave hundreds of recommendations related to how do we repair that harm, how do we dismantle systemic racism, and how do we definitely impact the quality of life of Black Californians, and as a result, all Californians. And so we, as a caucus, are mirroring that in terms of our legislative package.
Now, ACR 135 by Assemblymember Weber calls on the state of California to issue a formal recognition and acceptance of responsibility, essentially issuing a formal apology. Will you tell us why you think that's important?
Extremely important. And so it's actually two different parts. So we have the resolution detailing the harms, and then we have a separate bill being introduced by Assemblymember Joan Sawyer for the actual apology. And so the resolution is the acceptance, the recognition, acceptance, and acknowledgement that harms were made. And this is extremely important because as we've talked with our colleagues, as we've been in communities, the question for many folks is, why California? And the Reparations Task Force, their report did a great job of detailing that out. And so this is now our opportunity in the legislature to lay that out of why California. When people think about the harms against Black folks in general, their mind automatically goes to the South. When they think about the violence against Black individuals, they go to the South. When they think about the policies and discrimination that come from those policies, their mind goes to the South. All of that happened right here in the state of California. We were founded as a free state, but when slaves fled here, we sent them back. Wow. When we talked about building freeways, we didn't go to, the white neighborhoods. We went to the Black neighborhoods and decimated them, where they had home ownership. We're not talking about people who were renting apartments and things like that. We went to communities where people actually owned homes and decimated their neighborhoods to build our transportation system network. And so these are some of these very few, but there are more countless ways that we've harmed Black individuals and descendants of slaves in California. And so this resolution is the start of that, of just acknowledging it, seeing in print in the legislature, not the report. The report is amazing and great and thoughtful. But now it's taking that report, which is a series of statements, and moving it into action here in the legislature. And it starts with ACR 135 from Dr. Akilah Weber.
Thank you. Now, you wrote Assembly Constitutional Amendment 8. What is the purpose of ACA 8, and why is it important to do this?
Yes, ACA 8 comes from a couple of places. First of all, it was early on within the Reparations Task Force, their recommendations, even prior to it being a draft, coming out in draft, it became crystal clear that we still had this language in our Constitution that prohibited slavery. It prohibited involuntary servitude, but it had an exception in there, except in punishment of a crime. So we said slavery is okay if you are a prisoner. If you are an incarcerated person, then we can treat you like a slave. And so that crystallized really clear in the early work of the reparations task force. Assemblymember Sidney Comlanger Dove introduced ACA 3. She moved over to the Senate, and on the Senate side, it failed. And primarily because of the cost. People were thinking about, what is the cost if we can't use this free and cheap labor to do things for the state of California, to do things for businesses, things like that. And so because of that conversation around that, it failed. And so we as a Black Caucus, it was a priority of the Black Caucus in that legislative session. We as a Black Caucus, and me being chair, introduced it in this legislation. And so we've made it through the Assembly and headed to the Senate floor again. And to have this conversation about ending slavery in California state constitution. And you would think that's an easy thing, right? Because when you talk to voters, they're like, of course slavery shouldn't exist. Yeah. But then when they hear about the punishment of a crime, then people get a little squishy, right? They get a little concerned. But it's important because slavery is wrong no matter the form. And just because someone is incarcerated doesn't mean there's a loss of human dignity. To say that someone should be enslaved or be in an involuntary servitude situation is essentially to say they are less than human. And that can't be said for any human being at all. And that's why this is extremely important. And, sometimes I'm a fiscal person. My background is accounting and finance, just trained in that. And so I can't help but look at dollars and cents in everything that I do. But there are some principles, and human dignity is one of them, that cannot be measured in dollars and cents. And I say that as an accountant. And so this is one of those things, and this is why it's extremely important to get it across the finish line in the Senate, to get it to the voters, and so that the values of Californians is aligned in our Constitution, that we value human dignity above all else.
The reparations task force covered so many, a broad range of topics. Why is there still a need for all of this work to be done, even in the year 2024?
It's a good question to why we are still dealing with this right now in 2024. And you would think we should have made progress already in this front. The task force report did a great job of detailing it out, of why we are still here. There is so much work to be done. The Black Caucus has put together 14 priority bills, as was stated, but you'll see the introduction of almost 30 bills on this subject just this year alone. Part of it is because we have to have conversations and introduce bills so that we can have the discussion about the harms that were made and how do we rectify it, how do we resolve it, how do we solve it to ensure members of our community, Black individuals, are taken care of. And this work really is systemic. It is pervasive. It is in our laws. It is in our policies. It is, when you look at our budget priorities, they are not addressing the harms that have been made to Black individuals. And so it takes this approach where we in the legislature have to look at it from a legislative and budget view. And then even with our governor, who has power over policy in the executive office, there is work for him to do. And he's been a great collaborative partner with the Black Caucus, and I'm so appreciative of that. And so I think you will see over the next, especially 3 years with this governor, you will see year after year changes in legislation, budget, and policy that will address these harms. But it will take time because it is pervasive. And that is the issue that we see with biases. It takes time to uncover. So I know that I'm ready to do this work with my colleagues, not just the Black Caucus colleagues, but those in the legislature, to ensure that we won't be here in 2034 still talking about the harms against Black individuals and trying to rectify it.
So you all are doing a lot to increase everyone's understanding of Black history. I want to ask you, what do you think that non-African Americans should do to better understand Black history?
There are so many books to read, but I would just encourage them, to pay attention. recognizing that, if you have children in school, you should be advocating for Black history to be taught, because Black history is American history. And why would you want your child to, be missing any part of history? And then I would also encourage them, really in a time where social media is the way we get our news, is to really think about what they see online and whether they should share it or not. Because a lot of the misinformation around, Black history is shared on social media. And so I would encourage people to be mindful of, before you share something, is it true? Just ask yourself, do you think it's true? Can you verify it for somewhere else? And then last but not least, recognize that if you see it in a movie or you see it on TV, doesn't mean it's necessarily true. And there's lots of drama and fiction in every story we tell. Just because you watch something doesn't mean that's Black history. And be mindful when you're talking to your Black friends and community members about, the trauma that you see on TV, because we do have a lot. I think in our community, we get traumatized regularly every time there's another movie about Black trauma and really sensationalizing harm to Black bodies. And so I want people to consider that.
So books and social media aside, is it important for us to have dialogue with one another about Black history?
Absolutely. It is extremely important. And being mindful of coming with an inquisitive mind and recognizing that you're talking to one Black person. A lot of times we generalize, and especially with others, we'll be like, well, I was talking to my Black friend and then I assumed it applied to all Black people, right? And so we are just as unique as a non-Black person. We come in with our perspectives and our family generations of being in a community. But I think that it speaks to that comment I made earlier about us being considered others, is that when you have those type of dialogues where you are inquisitive and mindful of the other human being in front of you, it helps to break down those viewpoints of otherism, and then realizing that we really are just one. And although our skin may look different, although our culture may be different, we still are one. As a human being, we are one. There is no daylight in our DNA.
I like it. We're making history every day, so I like your reminder, just remain mindful. So thank you, Assemblymember Wilson. I'm Joel Woolfolk, and thank you all for listening to the Look West podcast.
The Look West podcast is produced by California Assembly Democrats. When you think of Californian politics, remember to look west.